everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm the co-founder and CEO with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. Over the past 13 years, we have worked with life science companies from across the globe, helping them to do everything from creating virtual advisory boards to online medical education, to publication groups and all kinds of other things in between. And since the Insight Events platform has been launched, we've been helping large pharma companies with their corporate events, sales training, sales meetings, hackathons, and all sorts of other great virtual events. But really, the most important thing at Impetus is we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations with leading edge thinkers, tech entrepreneurs, provocateurs in the industry, we can all work to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So it doesn't just stop there, but we have to continue these conversations if we're going to move the agenda forward. This is precisely the reason we created our virtual platform, so we can bring all kinds of players around the table to have these ongoing discussions so we can really move policy, procedures, and ideas forward. So I'm really happy to having one of these great thinkers with me today. This is actually Dr. Tarry Ahuja, and he's the manager of program development in pharmaceutical reviews and senior real-world evidence advisor at the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technology in Health, also referred to as CADTH in Canada. It's the leading HTA agency in Canada. So prior to this, he was a senior medical real-world evidence scientist at Eli Lilly for both Europe and Canada. He is also currently a lecturer at Carleton University in Ottawa, and he's also been teaching biological foundations of addictions and health psychology for the past 14 years. Tarry graduated with a PhD in neuroscience with a specialty in electrophysiology and pharmacology from Carleton University. He has worked for over 10 years in the hospital setting in the area of sleep disorders and has over 10 years of clinical research experience in the areas of ear, nose, and throat, Alzheimer's, stroke, and ischemia with the National Research Council of Canada. Welcome, Tarry. So happy to have you on the show today.
Thanks so much, Natalie. It's those introductions that are that long are a little bit embarrassing. So,
well, I have to say, it's truly an impressive background, and I love the variety of things that you have done before landing at one of the most pivotal and important agencies in Canada right now. Tell us a little bit, just kind of backtracking a little bit, some double clicking on some of this. There's really interested in the work that you've been doing on biological foundations of addiction. How did you sort of get started in that, and also generally in health psychology?
Yeah, so it's I would love to say it was a calculated path, but it was really a path that just revealed itself as, life goes. And, like a lot of youngsters in school, I didn't really know exactly what I wanted, but I knew I liked science. I loved the brain. Medicines and drugs was really appealing. And, so off you go. And you're in this university setting, taking all these random courses. And then sometimes, if you're lucky, a chord will hit and something will resonate with you. And for me, it was the neuroscience area, and it led me into doing a PhD in the area, and getting to do some really groundbreaking work at the time. And getting to play. It's an opportunity in your life where you truly get to play with creative ideas, innovate, and you're so low on the totem pole that your job is to try and disrupt and say, hey, what new ideas can I come up with in this massive world of peer-reviewed clinical evidence? And you do that. And I was fortunate enough to have a great environment and worked on experiments and doing something called electrophysiology, which is where you record from single individual cells in the brain. And then you can apply different drugs, or you can work out the properties of those cells, and you can map out the brain by brain region and by function. And as you said in my far too long intro, the areas of the brain that I studied in dealt with hearing. Otolaryngology. And so we recorded in cells and mapped out a brain region that had not really been studied very well, and published that. And so those findings still stand today. And, for me, that was like a huge, accomplishment, saying, hey, you published something and you did some work. And so that was the path of doing bench science. And I think for a lot of us, that's a really unique situation where you're put into getting to play with experiments and trying to answer broad science questions. So that led to me being in this research academic area. And I'll skip a few steps ahead to answer your question. It was there that it really evoked my interest in the brain and trying to understand psychology. Then you layer in health psychology, and you're starting to talk about different aspects of how we survive, how we deal with stress, how do we cope with stress, personality types, how is our healthcare system set up, and that really interests me. And so you put those two together, and then you get health psychology. So the two areas of study that I teach at Carleton include addictions, where we're talking about individual drugs and how they impact specific receptors in the brain, things like pharmacokinetics or pharmacodynamics, things like how does it work once it's in your brain? How does your body deal with the drug once it's in your brain? That's one area. And then the health psychology is another side where we talk about the components that I just mentioned.
Beautiful, love it. So lots of really interesting and intriguing work in the neuroscience space, health psychology, and then moving into a whole other area around real world evidence. So looking at data and information in a completely different world. How did you get into that, and how did you translate that into the work that you started doing with health outcomes research at Eli Lilly?
So that's great. It's another one that you sort of fall into, and you know, I'm going to start by saying this term real world evidence has become this like hot, sexy term. It's this new thing. It's the buzzword, and there's full meetings around this around the world. And if you just start searching up how much gets published on a daily basis on real world evidence, it's baffling. The reality is it's not that new. It's been given a makeover, and it's been given a new purpose, and so that's what's driven some of this new notoriety. But the reality is, you know, if you bin evidence, you can put it into two broad bins. You'd have your classic randomized controlled trial, a clinical trial that you hear about that's done in a very systematic, organized fashion. And for years, even to this day, it is still the gold standard of what is required for medicines to come to market and how researchers answer questions. And there's a reason for that. It's because you're controlling, as the name implies, you're controlling for as many variables as you can so that you're really focused in on the treatment. So I'll break it down into like simple English. So you're doing a clinical trial, you want to pick and choose patients as homogeneous as possible, so that, you know, you want, say, males 25 to 35, non-smokers, non-drinkers, no other underlying issues, no comorbidities, nothing. Just the only problem that they have might be headaches, and you have a new medicine for headaches or migraine. And so you want to remove all these extraneous variables. So the only thing you're looking at is this medicine, and is it dealing with your headache? So that at the end of the day, at the end of the clinical trial, you can say our medicine, you know, medicine X was fantastic and it removed headaches in 85% of our patients. Our medicine is a breakthrough. This needs to come to market. And those who are going to be making the decisions or looking at the results will say, well, yeah, they've excluded all the other variables. And so it's clear that this medicine works. So that's how we've been conducting ourselves. That's how HTA regulatory bodies, decision makers make decisions based on that type of information. And you can see why it makes good sense. So that we say that it has high internal validity, meaning in that bubble that you've created, the results are very, very accurate, but it has low external validity, meaning in the real world, we're not really quite sure how that would relate. And doctors and physicians and those that are making decisions sometimes say, well, that's great in your bubble, and those 25 to 35-year-olds that, you know, they're not overweight, have no other issues, it worked. But that's not who I'm seeing. I'm seeing overweight, depressed men who drink a lot and they have headaches. So how will this medicine work with them? So that would be a real world setting now. So we've had clinical trials that look at observational data or post hoc analyses of data or have registry data. That data has existed for a very long time. And that's all really, in the broad definition, real world data or real world evidence. So those two things, while they seem completely different, are related. They have been around for quite some time, but we're now understanding a couple of things have really pushed real world evidence into the forefront. And one is technological advent. So in the past, somebody, you know, to house and have a registry or to have the capacity to hold, thousands and thousands of pieces of data in a secure fashion would require, the floor of an office building with servers and security and all this stuff just to manage that. Now, with a couple of bucks, you can get a computer, a little mini server, and you have the cloud, and you can have all this data quite secure, accessible by several people for a fraction of the cost of what was required, and even the technical expertise. So that's happened. Second, just acquisition of data has improved exponentially. So a lot of folks listening to this talk today are wearing an iWatch or carrying an iPhone. Like, that's gathering health data, whether it's from steps to calories to where you are. That's all data, personal data and information. We have electronic medical records. We have all this stuff that is now being captured that was not being captured 10 years ago. And this is really useful, valuable information. And we're starting to now see its value along the healthcare pathway and in other uses as well.
Beautiful, lovely, and really well explained the concept of real world evidence, which is, again, not a new concept, but it's been recapitulated or reframed based on all of the other parameters, including the fact that there's wearables, technologies, sensors that are kind of feeding into the ability and the expansion of this evidence. So let's just actually take a step back, Terry, a little bit. For those people who may not be aware of what CADTH as an organization or an agency in Canada does, and really a little bit more of an explanation of what HTA is as well. So just giving a bit of a background, because there has been a bit of an evolution of this agency. So maybe you can kind of paint a picture a little bit of what that looks like.
Sure, happy to do so. So CADTH is much easier to say and digest than Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technology in Health. It's a mouthful. It's a really great organization that's doing really useful work that goes undetected. I think for most people don't know who we are, what we do. I remember when I started working at CADTH, I told my mom, and I was like, "Mom, I'm working at this place." She's like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Well, Mom, it's okay. I don't need to explain it to you." So simply put, I mean, a lot of people are really aware of what Health Canada is. They're in the news all the time. We think we broadly know what they do, and we're sort of a cousin of Health Canada. We work in concert together. We support each other in a lot of ways, and we're a not-for-profit organization. So we get some of our funding from Health Canada and from each of the jurisdictions or provinces, and we have some cost recovery and a variety of things that we do. But we're a not-for-profit organization, and the reason is we need to be unbiased in what our objectives are, and what are those objectives. So those objectives are to take a look at all the new medicines and health technologies. So that can be drug or device that are coming to market. So first they go to Health Canada to get something called notice of compliance. Basically, does it work? Is it safe? And once you pass that test, the next question is, well, what is the comparative clinical and cost effectiveness? Meaning in English, like, how does this pair up against the other medicines that do the same thing? And does the price tag make sense? So if you're producing a drug and that drug is no better than a placebo or a Tic Tac, then really you should not proceed. Okay, and it wouldn't go anywhere, and it just sort of dies there. But nobody's really going to submit and try and get approval for a drug that's not better than a Tic Tac, unless it's really minty fresh. But even then, I don't think you're gonna submit. So it wouldn't even get through Health Canada. But assuming it gets through Health Canada, saying this drug works, it's safe, we are seeing no red markers, red flags here, we look at how well is it working? And we do something called systematic review. And this is us looking at all the evidence that is currently publicly available, including whatever the manufacturer gives us. So they formally submit and they say, here is all the evidence that we have on all of our clinical trials, all the real world evidence, anything that we have related to this drug that we have developed, we're giving to you. And CADTH also looks globally to see what else has been put out there in the public domain related to this drug in terms of evidence. We assimilate all this evidence and we do something called a systematic review, which is where we compare everything to each other. And we can do this directly or indirectly. And we try to come out with a pool of evidence. And the evidence should either say that this drug works great and the price that it's being proposed to be sold at makes a lot of sense, or this drug works, but the price is too high. This drug doesn't work that great, but the price is fair. This drug does not work at all, and the price is too high. So there's a variety of sort of combinations going from this thing's fantastic and it needs to come to market right away versus this, they need to produce more evidence, or the evidence is not clear, or is not conclusive, or it's just cost prohibitive. Now, if a medicine costs, a treatment costs $1 million, and it's going to impact 10% of our country, you can imagine quickly how that would bankrupt our healthcare system. So we have to have some policing to say these numbers kind of don't make sense. And there's a whole team of health economists that work on what that looks like and different varieties of pricing and models and impacts. So a lot of work goes into the HE side of things, along with the clinical side of things, looking at the actual outcomes. So if you're looking at a drug for, say, cardiovascular disease, one of the primary outcomes you want to look at is cardiovascular events, mortality, death, hospitalizations. Those are called outcomes, things that you look at to see, is this drug working? And you want those to be good. You want them to be better than good. You want them to be great. And you do that. So all that gets compiled into a review, and it is presented by CADTH to an expert review panel. And that review panel is made up of clinicians, doctors, specialists, those that are invested in the field and have, patients' interests in mind, market access in mind, not just, well, it's costing too much, we don't want this drug to come out. That's not at all what we're doing. We're just looking to see, is this drug, is it safe, does it work, and is the price fair? The committee then makes the recommendation, and the recommendation will be, list this drug. We recommend that you list this drug as is, or at this price range, or do not list this drug. And then each province decides to listen or take heed of what we're saying and make a listing decision. So I think this might be new information for people, but in our country, each province manages their own drug formulary, meaning, the medicines you get in Ontario might be slightly different than the medicines you have access to in BC and out east and so on. And so each manages their own. They're fairly consistent, but there's, some differences in criteria or prerequisites required to get the medicine. And then they'll make that choice. And typically the alignment with what CADTH, review committee suggests to what the jurisdictions are saying is quite high, in and above 90%, meaning they're listening to the advice given to them by this expert review committee and by CADTH. So that's one major stream of work of what CADTH does. And I'll just quickly mention the second stream as it relates to real world evidence. And that is looking at something called optimal use of HTA. And HTA stands for Health Technology Assessment. So in English, that means you studying a technology that's going to somehow impact or change our health, medicines or drugs or devices. So this optimal use group is a group that I lead, and we look at the medicines that are being approved, that are available. Are they being used optimally? So are we still reimbursing drugs that are really out of date or unsafe, or really not providing value for dollar? Or is there a whole new drug class coming? And how does this new drug class compare to that of the drugs we're currently already prescribing? And we use the same approach. We find all of the evidence, we do a big review, and we have experts, we have a patient voice, clinician voice, and we come up with recommendations to saying, based on the evidence that we have, this is what we suggest. And again, the drug plan managers and those who make those decisions decide to use or not to use our information and make a decision. And we bundle all of this under our tagline of evidence-based decision-making. So as opposed to just following my gut, or a doctor saying, I practiced for 20 years, I know what's best. Well, you have, global data saying maybe something different than what you're suggesting or aligning with what you're saying, but it's being based on actual evidence. And in the era that we're living right now, I'm sure we'll get to it later today, that's key. That's very, very important to be making decisions based on evidence.
So what a wonderful explanation of that, Terry. And I think it gives a really good concept of something that can sometimes feel really abstract and extremely complicated. So I think you've done a great job of simplifying that. So let's just say theoretically, we are a manufacturer, pharmaceutical company. Maybe we're located outside of Canada and we are trying to get a new product in the market. We've just received notice of compliance from Health Canada, and we now need to go through the CADTH review system. You've already explained, generally speaking, how that works, but somebody is obviously going to be a big rush and a big huff to be able to get access at the public level and eventually through the private level with private payers. Can you explain a little bit about the timing and how private versus public players play out with the final decisions or recommendations that the CADTH makes for their particular product?
You raised a really good question, Natalie. So I can say right at the top, the private runs slightly differently, and this is a great example of how one stream can be a disruptor or lead to innovation or embrace innovation a little bit more than others, right? So private tends to provide access to more medicines sooner, more broadly speaking, versus public. So, for those who are unaware of the difference, private refers to groups that either your employer is paying for or you're paying for directly to get enhanced access to services like medicines or physiotherapy or a dentist and doctor, all those kinds of things that are not coming out of your pocket and they're covering you. That's private. So the private playground, I like to call, is actually a really great area for innovation, because they're willing to say, well, this employer wants the latest and greatest medicines, and as a result, they're paying a higher premium. And so we want to offer them access to medicines that are groundbreaking or more innovative. And manufacturers want this because it gets their medicine out in the real world. It gets them early access to data in the real world and allows them to validate either their clinical trial program and to allow others around the globe to see what their medicine looks like in the hands of clinicians and in patients. So that happens. If things look really great, all of a sudden they have leverage and they have a proxy to say, listen, we've applied this in the private insurance program and all these patients have had it, and look at how well it's doing. This is something you're going to want. So that's why you can see the catalyst. That's a catalyst for them to try and work their program. In the public program, they go through the Health Canada CADTH process. And you're asking about timing and how that looks, and in terms of market access, it does take a little bit more time, and there is more red tape, and it's usually because of the associated costs. Now, when you're opening something to the public, and that the name implies, it's public. It's for everyone who's allowed to fit within that mold of being a public patient. So that's millions and millions of people. So there's a lot of work and effort that goes into ensuring that the decisions being made at the public level are based on evidence. It is a more conservative approach for a reason, right? I think that it's really challenging to review a drug, bring it to market, and then pull it off the market in a large public environment if there's either a problem or we feel that the drug is not working. Whereas private can make those decisions quite nimbly, and that's sort of its own. They have their own rules that they follow, but overall, public or private, we follow the same overall process of that it still needs to go through Health Canada for Notice of Compliance, and that it goes through review by CADTH.
So Terry, it's really important that you're suggesting all of this. One's quicker than the other, and there's lots of good reasons for it. I'm also just kind of curious, based on the recent experience of COVID-19, where there's a lot of hurdles that one would never have thought we could have surpassed in Canada based on the protocols and the processes that we've all been acclimatized to, which was a certain amount of time it requires for regulatory approval, a certain amount of time for CADTH approval and access and reimbursement and all of the reviews. But we found that because there was a political will and a huge emphasis, basically holistically across the globe, that a lot of that was accelerated. So the same issue that happened one long time ago when people didn't realize that they could run a mile in 4 minutes, and once it was surpassed, it suddenly became a possibility. Do we see us breaking down the barriers on the current trajectory of timelines, or is there another political agenda? Meaning, is there going to be a different timeline for products like expensive oncology or rare disease products versus something that might be an asthma or a diabetes product that might be just relatively inexpensive? Or is it also based on how you can time the decisions that are being made by your team, which is sort of the optimal use group, when you're pulling something out so that you can pull something in? Tell us a little bit about the thinking that goes on behind the timing of approvals or recommendations.
Yeah, so it's like 12 questions there. So we'll tackle. We'll
break them down.
We'll break them down. So this is the first time in sort of, I don't want to say modern civilization, but the last chunk of years that the whole world has been looking for the cure for one disease or a vaccine. And with that kind of weight, that kind of emphasis and drive to find a solution, it's incredible. And what has it led to? Well, it's led to the development of a variety of vaccines, 2 different mechanisms of action, them being distributed around the world. The rollout's been monumental. It hasn't been amazing in every capacity, but it's still a monumental task if you think about it. A lot of people, if good friends of mine, family ask me, like, well, how is it possible that we can't find a cure for Alzheimer's, or it takes 2 years to get this medicine to market, but in a blink of an eye we have 5 vaccines and it's being spread all over the world and it's got all this approval? Like, how is that possible? I mean, it's really about drive. And if when you have the whole world trying to find a solution, things will change. So it was really a transformative period this last 18 months that we've had these types of things happening. It is forced, and again, I think we'll get into it as our talk goes, but it gets into the push for there to be innovation in how we review medicines, how they're implemented, how people develop vaccines, the review process. Things that we had never thought of before were being put in a crucible, in a pressure cooker, because time was of the essence. And if you look at a similar scenario, and that would be oncology or rare diseases, where time is of the essence. People have months, weeks, days to live. And here we are seemingly sitting around a table like fat cats, weighing on evidence and deciding, well, I don't know if this evidence is good enough for me. And people kind of have that view, thinking, well, that's not fair. I want this medicine. I want it now. I would say almost every person at that table making these decisions wants the exact same thing. But the fear is to allow medicines through that either are unsafe, don't do anything, and are just draining because they are quite expensive. And we have a limited purse, right? So that's really some of the key anchors as to how we're making our decisions. That being said, there's a couple of words that we think of all the time, 2 words, and that's unmet need. And that is a really big integral part of what we do. And is there unmet need? Is there a rare disease with patients dying, and we have a potential drug that could potentially provide some benefit, even though the data is not bulletproof? There's a much higher willingness to include or expedite to allow that to come to market, simply because there is no other options and patients are like dying. So of course, the unmet need is high, willingness to expedite or to be more forthcoming in terms of access is high. When we're looking at the far end of the spectrum, and perhaps it's like another drug for a mood disorder like depression, where there is already 22 existing options. Not to downplay the importance of depression or mental health and with the sufferer that they go through, but there's options. And so there's less of an unmet need. And is this new agent simply what sometimes called in the community a Me Too drug, a drug that's doing essentially the same thing with a few tweaked benefits? Is that something that we need to expedite to market, or is that something that we can, I don't want to say deprioritize, but maybe take our time to follow the due diligence that we normally would? And so that's an example of unmet need. For COVID, there was clearly an unmet need. We had no options, right? And people were scrambling for things like hydroxychloroquine, and we're looking at remdesivir, these early agents. So a glimmer of promise. And most countries were willing, whether it's the FDA or Health Canada, to say, let's try it. We're allowing emergency use access, and out it went. We quickly realized, well, it's really not doing much, and let's just pull it back. Let's take away access, and we're going to move on to something else. Until thankfully, we found vaccines that are showing great efficacy. Those vaccines also went through an expedited path, right? They came to market and were developed and approved in a much faster path than we would have ever have seen, for the number one reason of unmet need, right? So that's really a guiding light that we tend to follow, to say, the unmet need will help shape the speeds with which we try to review the medicines that we're looking at.
One of the other things that's really interesting that's happening now is we have moved from traditionally these big pharma, big wig products that are, affecting millions and millions of people. And a lot of people say that a lot of those products are out there, everything's kind of been developed, available. There's not really that much more that's happening. And so we've now evolved into these technological advances where we're kind of super niching or categorizing. A lot of this is coming through genetic testing, variants. We're starting to find things like companion diagnostics, genetic biomarkers. These are opportunities for really optimizing the ideal patient for certain medications, but it's also dramatically increasing the number of products, the number of ways and methodologies for products to get stacked and used, and it adds this whole other layer of complexity. How is CADTH and other organizations you're working with dealing with this in terms of the super niche with especially very expensive products?
Yeah, it's not an easy thing. I think traditionally, like you said, it's been fairly straightforward. You have a pill or a shot, and that's your medicine, and off you go. Or there's a simple device. I'm thinking diabetes, blood glucose monitors, pretty straightforward things. And the line was clear: drug, device, off you go. What's happened is, like you said, the era of blockbuster drugs targeting a therapeutic area are happening less and less frequently. I think it's because we have our fingers across of most therapeutic areas where there is some form of treatment options. Not always great, not always a cure, but there's something. And where industry and researchers have started to shift is towards new approaches or biotechnologies. And that has been a bottleneck for humans, really. It's not the lack of ideas, it's the lack of biotechnology to implement those ideas. And that seems to be a fairly rudimentary hurdle. Like, well, if you have great ideas, but you don't have the technology to do those things, well, it's still just an idea. And so what's changed over the last 10 years is our ability to innovate in terms of biotechnology to create new approaches to the same problems that we've had. And it's created things like you've already mentioned, gene therapies and other approaches that are going to make our old way of treating diseases out of date or archaic. We're going to look back in 15 years from now and saying, I can't believe that we took us that long to figure out Alzheimer's disease. And like, look, with this new approach, we had that figured out pretty quick, plus these other 7 diseases. And the things that are afflicting our population today will not be the same diseases afflicting our patients in terms of mortality in 15 years from now. I think the diseases will still be there, but our treatment options will basically make a lot of these obsolete, managed diseases. And what will change is our capacity and our ability to embrace the new biotechnology. And so to answer your question, like how is CADTH or other HTA bodies and regulatory bodies dealing with this? It is a transformative, monumental task that we're having to undertake. So to now try and build expertise and understanding of novel areas and figure out how they need to be reviewed and approved so that we have access to them is a huge question. And then the other really huge question is the sticker price associated with these technologies. They're not cheap. And for certain diseases, there's what we call curative options, something that will now make a disease obsolete. We have a cure, but that cure is $2 million per patient. Who pays for that, and how do we pay for that? And it's really a terrible conundrum where you have a cure in hand, but the price tag is too much. You're a little kid with your allowance, and you really want that race car, and that race car is just too much for the allowance that you have. So what do you do? So, we really don't have a solution right now other than trying to continue to review and build capacity to review and make some good choices. The other hurdle that we're having to overcome is those who make some of the decisions at the provincial and federal level need to be educated, need to understand some of these technologies. So there's that whole process of building capacity and understanding there. So you still want to foster innovation. You want industry to come up with new ideas because it is our future, but it's really hard when they can't execute and actually bring to market their ideas. So things are we're in a really exciting period, I think, in our existence, is that we're technologically speaking coming to our own and able to come up with these great ideas. But where it's going to be great is our kids are going to have access to technologies and medicines that we never even dreamt of.
So on that point, I'm actually curious, Tarry, if this is already starting to happen with CADTH. Are you starting to see the infiltration of your, evaluations, starting to look at things like software as medical devices, apps, various things that one day physicians will be utilizing digital pharmacies and prescribing an app, maybe in combination with a product or completely replacing it? We're seeing there are a lot of 510Ks and other things being approved in the US and then otherwise. Is this starting to come through, and are people trying to access public payments for them?
Yeah, so while it's not an official stream yet where we're looking at some of these technologies, we do have a device program that does look at a lot of these questions in terms of apps and new devices, new approaches, new techniques. These do get reviewed. Not all of them lead to reimbursement or a recommendation from CADTH. Instead, a lot of the jurisdictions will say, well, there's this new app, we have some questions about it. Is there any evidence that's available around it? Because you need to remember CADTH's primary goal is to produce evidence for those who make decisions, like evidence-based decision making. While CADTH does not make the decision, we clearly influence and assist and support that decision that needs to be made. Our job is to find the evidence. So if there's a new app, there's going to be a lot of new apps, and how well does that app work? And where do you find the information on its comparative efficacy versus other apps? And what is its intent? So we are reviewing a lot of stuff. We have a variety of CADTH products that would address that. So it's not always a formal CADTH recommendation, as I was mentioning. We have something called technology reviews. We have a rapid response program. We do health technology assessment, which is just really reports looking on the available evidence so folks can at least see what's there. That is already happening. And I think that's only going to burgeon and improve and expand. And as things become more monetized, meaning here is something that equals this type of outcome and we're looking for this type of reimbursement, I'm sure there will be a process that's going to have to be developed that looks at recommendations and eventual reimbursement by the drug plans. We're not there just yet, and I don't think there's enough of a push, but I think there's clearly a pool of talented folks creating apps and technologies and devices that are looking for that in the near future.
We've gone through an unprecedented period in the past year and a half, geopolitical, social unrest, economic upheaval. We're seeing entire new currencies coming through and everything in between. One of the questions comes down to is the traditional way we administer or fund healthcare in Canada specifically, where there's national jurisdiction and then funneling or transferring money at the provincial level. What is the discourse on simplifying that? So we've talked about this process where there's a regulatory reviewer, with the Health Canada, then it goes to CADTH with another secondary recommendation, and then the third piece is that now needs to go to the actual provinces or the various agencies to get a subsequent approval and review. How can all of that be simplified, Terry, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's an issue that's been identified by all of us that are invested in the process, and this has been an ongoing evolution. The steps need to be there, but then how do you make them more efficient? How do you harmonize this, and how do you make it something that's not taking a year to review medicines? Because again, like I said, the end goal is really to bring medicine to patients and to bring it to market, and nobody really wants to stop that. So short term, what's happened is our groups, Health Canada, CADTH, INES, which is the Quebec equivalent HCA body for CADTH, we've been working in concert to do something called aligned reviews. So instead of having it go through all the way through Health Canada for them to put their notice of a compliance, and then we'd initiate our review, we're doing it in a harmonized fashion. So we're actually starting it almost at the same time. And this has allowed us to reduce the time required for review by both bodies significantly. It also allows for shared analysis of evidence, aligned recommendations. So it's been a win on a lot of levels. We've also worked a lot with groups like NICE out of the UK and the FDA to try and work with them to do, a lot of times they actually get to see the evidence or get submitted to, manufacturer submits to them before it comes to Canada. So if we can be part of that process and we're getting either a sneak peek or doing some form of review at that moment, that also expedites things. So these are things that we are currently doing, and they've been under development and implemented over the past few years. So it was quite a challenging task to work with different governing bodies around the world to do that, but we've done that. And we're doing more and more of these aligned reviews. I think if you look more medium to long range, there's been a lot of chatter over the last few years for two things. First would be the national formulary, which, in English, for those who aren't really versed in this, is to have the country act as one formulary. A lot of countries already do this. And so what are the pros and cons of that? The clear benefits are you're now negotiating with the manufacturer as a country. So for our country, upwards of over 30 million people, that many people looking for medicines as a one unit gives you much more negotiating power, and it gives you a lot of more buying power and options. And it's also going to make us more attractive as a country because manufacturers need to pick and choose where they go first. And that elevates our status in terms of a spot they might want to go to, because they're thinking either we get it, which would be the whole country, or we don't, versus, well, we got Ontario and BC, but we couldn't get anybody else. So those are some of the benefits. There's also another benefit that there's harmonization across our country. So it doesn't matter where you live, we all have the same access. There's good equity for access to medicines, which is always a goal of something we want to try and do. Some of the negatives are that it requires a lot of setup, right? And it's not easy. So what should be on the list? What shouldn't be on the list? What if Ontario's prerequisites or criteria for medicine are A, but BC's is different? Whose is better? Who is right? What about provinces that have a lot of patients with a certain disease and other provinces that have low incidence or frequency of that disease? So it's not so easy. It's not so black and white, which is why it really hasn't been done just yet. But there's been a renewed interest and a drive to try and achieve some form of national formulary. There's been some preliminary work done by Health Canada. CADTH has been involved to do some work looking at what are some of the options, what are some of the options of paths that we could take, and what would it look like? It has not been approved or embraced in any way, and so I'm not saying that, I'm just saying the conversations are happening. Ultimately, this all relies on our government, and the government is going to decide where we end up with that. With each election, with each renewed parliament, there's different paths that they choose to take. This current sitting government does have interest in a national formulary, so we'll see where that ends up. And that would be a potential solution to some of the problems that you suggest, Natalie. Another option, another thing that's been thrown around and has been in the public domain is the idea of a central governing body. So instead of there being CADTH and a Health Canada and a TCPA and a different groups that do different things, there would be one Canadian drug agency, much like the FDA, one governing body that had all the different facets of what needs to be done in one house. And there's some form of autonomy and simple aligned direction as to where they're going versus this fragmented approach that we currently have. I also see that being something that makes a lot of sense. How we implement and how that gets done is, I say monumental a lot, but it seems to be a monumental task, something that needs to get done. But it would be disruptive. It would be completely game changing in how, as our country, if we have both a national formulary and a Canadian drug agency, it would transform how medicine and healthcare is applied in our country.
One of the things that I think could be concerning for a lot of people who are aware of the way different countries have managed the COVID-19 vaccine. Canada is an interesting entity in the fact that we don't have our own manufacturing. We're caught a little bit, off guard, if you will, and we're scrambling for many, many things during the past 15 months. One does take the opportunity to reflect on the amount of money that gets transferred in healthcare, or is that gets put towards healthcare. There's been a lot of concerns around rare diseases, really important products in oncology like the CAR-Ts and immunotherapies and many other things are quite expensive. I guess the light has shone, if you will, now that we have a global scorecard, is the average Canadian citizen aware that there may be some products that are available globally, but they don't have access to, in a similar way to what kind of has transpired here with the COVID-19? Is this going to light the fire, if you will, on really propagating this conversation and doing something in a really forward direction that's going to benefit everybody and all Canadian citizens?
Yeah, like my crystal ball is broken, unfortunately, but I would say that this has really shown the cracks in our system. I mean, there's been good and bad. The innovation, the collaboration that was lacking in the past, the drive for either it's new technologies or approaches to healthcare, all those things were a spark. This COVID pandemic was a spark for that because we had no choice. We needed to come up with solutions in a system that was in front of us. But what it did show was a lack of infrastructure to handle something like this. The closest thing that we had was SARS years ago, and even back then we thought we weren't prepared. There was a post, it wasn't even a pandemic at the time, but a post-epidemic consult that showed where we needed to improve our systems. And that document said things like, your preparedness wasn't there, you didn't have a process, you didn't have governance, you didn't have all the things in place. And so some changes were made, and we clearly can see now that when we have a global pandemic that affected our whole country and the world, those minor tweaks were just that minor. We need major transformation, and some of that has started to happen. And you look at Canada sort of following somewhere in the middle to upper spot of a range of countries where we have access to medicine. And while the initial release of medicines in Canada was weak and the rollout was weak, and there was a lot of flaws and problems, and there's lots of inequity. We've caught up and we've done well, comparatively speaking, if you look at other countries where they still have no vaccine available, or there's, single digits and people who even have a single shot. So, we are doing okay, but we think of ourselves a lot of times as global leaders. And we like to think of ourselves in that upper echelon of the G7s and others that are, have access to medicines. We know what we're doing. We're plugged in. And I think we saw quite clearly that that's not where we are, and that we do have problems. And it's forced us to re-examine things like, the regulatory process and how medicines and drugs are reviewed. How are they implemented? How are they rolled out? How are they manufactured? I think the world was given a wake-up call. Those who aren't actually in this bubble of health policy and health review, understanding where medicines are actually made and where are they coming from, and that it's just a few hubs around the world, right? Where Canada used to have some capacity to produce medicines and had manufacturing facilities, and we let that go. And it's led to a situation where we, with our pants down, or our sleeves rolled down because we couldn't get injections, right? And that was, it was, I think, embarrassing as a country, but the government and the average person said, why is this happening in this country? Why do we not have access to medicine? While things have gotten better, we're still in a place where people are logging online, frantically clicking on buttons, trying to get a second shot or a first shot, and waiting in line for hours at a clinic to get an injection. So, there's other countries roughly around the same size that have done better. And you start to ask the question, why and how do we learn from that? And the lessons learned, I think, will continue for months and years to come. But that conversation is happening. There's already been lesson learned dialogues. I've been part of some meetings to provide some feedback on how we felt the HTA process went, the evidence generation process went, along with others who are clinicians, front lines, giving their input, and folks from Health Canada. So being part of those conversations lets you know that there is some dialogue around how do we do better, but we still have a lot of work to do, I think, to hopefully never have this problem again.
Absolutely. So well said. We hear the word patient centricity, and as you were alluding to earlier, Terry, it's kind of a buzzword that's been around for years and years, but it has a certain cachet to it these days. Obviously, COVID-19 has struck everybody. There was a moratorium on trials, and people had to do a pivot going into decentralized and hybrid trials. We're now starting to talk about PROMs, or other words, patient-reported outcome measures, or PREMs, which are our patient-reported experience measures, and sensors and wearables and all kinds of things, helping potentially to accelerate discovery and being able to accelerate the extraction of data and entry into data lakes. I'm just curious about where CADTH believes all of this is going to go. What are they doing around these data lakes, conversations around them? How are we going to leverage them for things like population health management? And then on the other side of the coin, the conversation around surveillance and privacy and security, and how do I ensure that how do I make sure that my insurance company doesn't come after me because I've got such and such issue. So there's a balancing act, I think, that you have to develop between all of the various stakeholders that you are beholden to. So what is kind of CADTH's view on this next frontier, if you will, around patients?
Sure. So I thankfully, it's not just CADTH involved, and there is multiple stakeholders. I think CADTH's place in this continuum is around drug and device review, looking at evidence generation for those who need to make decisions. But we have spread our wings into other areas to try and support the system and do better in terms of evidence generation. Now, as it comes to the patient voice and the patient experience and patient-reported outcomes, I think we've always been inclusive of that, and we've tried to get even better. We have patient engagement officers who work at CADTH, and that's exactly what they do. So as we enter any review in the therapeutic area, we try and understand, is there advocacy groups, for that area? So for example, you look at, Alzheimer's, you might have the Alzheimer's Society of Canada, and they have clinicians and patient voice, and they're already doing a lot of great work. So why should we not be leveraging that work? How do we engage them to ensure our review is inclusive, it's holistic, it has everything we should be including, or we don't want to be missing evidence. A lot of times they're champions of that disease, so clearly they're going to know more than us. and we go to them to try and get that information. So the patient voice is really important. I think that we're really fortunate that we are engaged with other stakeholders along the continuum, others that do things around data collection, real world data, real world evidence. It's not just us. So, you asked where's CADTH going and what is our views on that? Our view is that we do embrace real world evidence, real world data. We do want that patient-centric path. And we've started a variety of initiatives at CADTH, along with others. So, we're not going to take all the spotlight here, but it is something we're involved with that we're leading that looks at engaging with these multiple stakeholders. So I'll take a step back, and when we talk about patient outcomes and we're talking about real world evidence, and some people, watching this might not even understand what is a patient reported outcome versus say a hard clinical outcome. A clinical outcome, like I mentioned, would be say a cardiovascular event, or if you're looking at cardiovascular disease, blood pressure, an actual number, so you can quantify and say this person, Terry had this reading, and that's what goes with his file. That's a hard clinical outcome, and it's usually linked to a disease. Now you can have a patient reported outcome, which is, well, how comfortable was it to get the injection? And how many days did you actually miss from work? And how has it improved your life? What was the convenience of the treatment algorithm? Those are patient reported outcomes. This improved my quality of life. Not just it saved my life, the medicine worked, but as a result, I'm much happier now. I'm able to ride my bike. I can have friends again. It's removed all the rashes from my body. Like these things that improve quality of life. And so, previously it was quite black and white. Did the medicine work? Are the clinical outcomes improving? Yes or no, recommend or do not recommend, full stop. But we realized, that you need to consider more than just clinical outcomes. And so the patient reported outcomes are quite important. And so that has now started to enter the conversation. And how does this impact, whether or not we should reimburse? And the provinces might say, well, both drugs are about the same in efficacy, meaning they both work about the same. But this one drug, they only got to take once a week, and this one is 4 times a day, right? So, maybe we allow the reimbursement of the once a month or once a week drug before, or provide both for those who really want that convenience. So those are some of the conversations that need to happen. I think that we also skirted away from a really important conversation, and that's related to an individual and the experience of being sick and our overall health. Right. So we talked a little bit about health psychology, and we talked about what that includes. And health psychology is not just a clinical outcome. It's not just the biological component of it. There's actually 3 components to it. And the current working model of health that is being taught today in medical schools versus what they taught 15 years ago is the biopsychosocial approach to health. And that is having a biological component, so the actual cardiovascular disease. But then there's a psychological component, meaning how does it impact your psyche, your psychological disposition, your personality. And then there's the social component, is how are you able to adapt and handle this with the social support that you have around you, whether it's access to care, friends, family, a loved one, a dog, a hamster. What do you have to help you in dealing with this disease? So going forward, we need to consider these different aspects and not just say, hey, this medicine works, let's approve or not approve. Instead, the dialogue is more around this whole component, this whole BPS approach. This is where real world evidence rears its head in real world data. And this is where we need to get, you mentioned, how do we handle interprovincial data sharing, and how do we access data, and how do you compare that data? These are really big, broad conversations that require, architecture, which requires something we currently don't have. And so CADTH, along with others, have created a real-world evidence working group, and that includes Health Canada, CADTH, ENS, regulatory bodies, data holders, so such as CADTH, which is the Canadian Institute for Health Information, and others related to real-world evidence generation related to our diseases, whether it's COVID, not COVID. That evidence goes somewhere, and it needs to be used. And what's been lacking in our country, and what needs to happen going forward, is use of this information. But how do you do it, and what outcomes should you be looking at? How does Ontario capture these outcomes, and how does BC capture these outcomes? Are they done the same way? Can they be shared? Can we compare? Can we pool? Like, the questions go on and on and on. So just sort of to plant the seed to let you know, this newly formed group, which is only about almost 2 years old, meets on a regular basis with all the stakeholders at the table, including industry, including patients, including the clinician voice and payers, to talk about how are we going to do this. And I think COVID has placed all of this into the crucible to try and make this go a little bit faster for us to be able to make better decisions based on some of this available evidence.
Absolutely. And throw AI in there, and then you got a whole other
Yeah,
discussion.
right.
My last
Right.
question for you before we close up is, obviously all of this is added some really interesting elements as we talk about limited coffers and wallets and payments, if you will, having these discussions around outcome-based agreements or things like pay for performance. And then throwing in what you just said, which is the biopsychosocial leverage, insurance companies leveraging things like incentivization programs and social credits and all kinds of other potential payments to patients to do certain things with their behaviors. What is the payment schema going to look like in the future, Terry?
Yeah, show me the money, right? So it's a hard thing. I think as Canadians, we pride ourselves in having this healthcare system, and we're really fortunate to have a healthcare system that allows, most of us access to care and access to like world-class care and medicines, and it's all being reviewed. So, I think a lot of times when you look at money, you have to look at what is our end goal, what do we want, and what do we have in front of us, and you have to remember how much healthcare chews up of our federal budget, like the amount of money that's in the total Canadian purse, how much gets chewed up by our healthcare system. We're actually at a crossroads. We're on the edge of the cliff of our system crumbling because the expenditures are continually increasing. Innovative and new technologies are costing more and more money. Our population is aging, right? And so when does it stop? Does it stop when we're spending 80% of our budget on healthcare, 90%? Like we still need to have schools, roads, all the different things that, all the other public support programs that we require. It can't all be healthcare. So this is some of the fuel that fires why we do comparative and clinical cost effectiveness, not just clinical effectiveness. And people a lot of times think of CADTH and others as barriers, saying, well, you're just looking at the price tag. And that's not true. And it's really driven by the clinical first, but then we have to look at the cost because we're looking at the sustainability of our healthcare system. And if somebody's not policing what's being spent in a way that we're making smart choices with the money that we have, then the system will crumble. So going forward, I think continued negotiation, maybe working as a country if we have one national formulary, making more evidence-based decisions, more transparency on how decisions are made will force those that are making these decisions to have some ownership. I think in the past, a lot of decisions were made behind closed doors, and they were different province by province, and they were based on handshakes and relationships. And that's fine for 20, 30 years ago. But today, I think, like I said, with all the innovation and the increased price tags, we need to be smarter with our money, and we need to have it anchored on, well, the evidence is saying what, and what is fair for me to pay you. And we want to continue to be reinvesting in potential future technologies. And we can't do that if we have no money to spend. So, it's this delicate dance of being supportive of innovation, of doing a good job of evidence review and making good, smart decisions on evidence-based decision making. And I also think, like, the last thing I sort of wanted to leave with is, in this era of COVID and this era of all the problems in front of us, what's allowed us to come through all of this, whether it's COVID or this cost crisis that we're in now, is collaboration, right? So whether it's within our own country, whether it's your own organization or across countries, that collaboration is what allowed us to get a vaccine to the forefront so quickly and is allowing us to have options today. It's due to this collaboration. So I think continued collaboration is something we need to really, really foster and support.
Beautiful, Terry. I just want to say I could literally speak to you for hours. I'm sure that I've asked that. There's probably hundreds of other questions that probably could have been asked. I'd probably love to have you on the show again because there's a whole slew of other things that you prompted in my thought process. You're fantastic.
Season two for sure.
For anybody who's listening to the show who wants to connect with Terry, he's obviously a wealth of information, probably going to point you in the right direction if you're not really quite sure where to go or who to speak to. Everything from new program development, real world evidence, what to do. He's a great guy to speak to. We're going to leave his contact details in the show notes below, so please be on the lookout for that. If you are interested in this discussion, we also encourage you to check out impetusdigital.com. This is the kind of stuff that we do asynchronously and synchronously in our platform, where we bring patients, payers, allied healthcare providers, physicians, other stakeholders together through a series of touch points to help move policy, procedures, innovation, discovery, ideas, and getting everybody to collaborate and work virtually in a way that's really seamless. Impetus actually helps to manage and consult through the whole process. We want to thank everybody for their time today. Please, if you can, like and subscribe to this channel. We'd really appreciate it if you could also leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you for your time, Terry. This was an awesome discussion, and wishing everybody a great day ahead.